Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Linode. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Vitici. Hi, Federico.
Hey, John. How's it going?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. I just started working on my iOS 12 review. Just the outline and the mind map. I'm taking it easier this year. I don't want to, I came back from WWDC and I didn't get deep into watching sessions and taking notes. So that's a nice change of pace. But I've started working on the basic structure. So it should be fun.
Oh, that's good.
I was looking into perhaps the feature of iOS 12, which is shortcuts, of course.
Right.
And I was thinking that I've seen some confusion on Twitter and on other podcasts and blogs about whether or not SiriKit, which is this API, this developer feature that is one of the components of shortcuts, whether or not that feature is new. And I want to do this episode about SiriKit and explaining what SiriKit is and what SiriKit does and which kinds of apps can integrate with SiriKit, because I wanted to explain that SiriKit is not a new feature of shortcuts. It's not a new API. It's been around since iOS 10. And it launched a couple of years ago as a way for apps to integrate with Siri. So SiriKit is the API that defines the integration of an app with the voice assistant. And it allows developers to build integrations that are based on extensions, basically. SiriKit is a framework that works with extensions. These extensions can be Intents or Intents UI, but the idea would be that you should be able to accomplish something in a third-party app without actually having to open the app. But you can complete this task right within Siri or other apps that use SiriKit. That's an asterisk that I want to explain in a few minutes. And these apps, these extensions, may or may not show you a custom interface in Siri. So this is a way for developers to accomplish two main goals. One of them is the ability to execute certain tasks in the background without having to actually open the app. So for example, you can pay someone on PayPal or Venmo without having to open those apps. You can initiate the task and complete the task entirely within Siri. And the second goal is the ability to show content in the form of a slightly customizable user interface within the context of Siri. So it's a way for developers to bring their design, their design styles and their content from apps into the Siri interface, which is, has some interesting effects on the usability of the assistant and working with these third-party apps that integrate with Siri. Do you think this is the explanation works so far? Because I'm going to get deeper into the details.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think the confusion is caused in part because of shortcuts being new and there being a component of that being the Siri shortcuts, right? Those shortcuts, that's a new part of the settings portion of Siri on iOS. But SiriKit itself, as you said, isn't a new thing, nor are extensions for that matter. Part of the thing about Siri is that it's really a marketing term more than anything else, and there are a bunch of different pieces to that puzzle and what makes up Siri. And one of those things is SiriKit, which has been around since I think it was iOS 10, right?
Yeah, iOS 10, when Apple introduced the first domains, which is another of these words that we need to understand. There's a lot of terminology going on here, which I know that it can be kind of complex to track, but it's important to understand the differences. SiriKit works in domains. Domains would be categories of tasks that SiriKit is capable of understanding and completing. There are multiple domains. I think we're approaching basically 10 at this point. We have messaging, we have lists and notes, we have payments, media, which is a new domain in iOS 12. We have visual codes, photos, ride booking, workouts, car, which it's actually two parts. There's CarPlay and car commands. And finally, we have restaurant reservations. And I want to go through some examples of apps that work within these domains for SiriKit. But first, there's another aspect that I want to talk about, and that is how SiriKit abstracts much of the complexity that involves dealing with natural language requests from users to the assistant. So the way that SiriKit is designed is developers don't have to care about how users speak to Siri or what kind of language they're actually using. It's a way that developers can build on top of Siri without having to care about the syntax of a question or how people like to format their requests to Siri. For example, one user may be extremely polite in saying, Siri, can you please look up for me a task that is due in OmniFocus? So using a very articulated and polite way of asking a question to an assistant. Other users may be more concise and may even actually use Apple calls this verbing the app's name, of using the name of an app on your phone as a verb. For example, WhatsApp John, WhatsApp would be the name of the WhatsApp messaging client. WhatsApp John saying, hey, how's it going? And that would be, hey, how's it going, would be a message created within WhatsApp using this concise and short and brief syntax. And developers don't have to think about this stuff. They can optimize for how the user pronounces, for example, the name of an app, but they don't actually need to do any natural language processing on their end because Siri does that behind the scenes. So SiriKit is essentially a plugin system for developers to work with the domain structure of SiriKit and say, I make a task manager, I want to integrate my task manager with Siri, but it's not like I need to account for 50 different languages. It's not like I need to make special exceptions for Italian or Portuguese or English. It just works because the main job of doing the natural language processing, that's done by iOS. That's done by Siri. That's done in the cloud. The developers don't have to care about those problems. So I feel like that's an important difference between what's going on with SiriKit and what happens, for example, with other assistants, such as making Alexa skills or what you can see on other platforms. But with SiriKit, developers primarily need to care about plugging into the SiriKit framework and making sure that their type of application works with SiriKit and the intents UI extensions. Does that still make sense?
Right. And that's a big benefit because there's no natural language coding that has to go on for the developer. Right. I guess the biggest drawback, though, is that these intents and these domains have to be developed by Apple. So they've been rolled out over the last couple of years. As you said, there have been about 10 of them. But and I know we'll talk a little bit about shortcuts a little bit later, but I think shortcuts is in some respects a response to the fact that we haven't had, a full categorization of all the kinds of apps that might want to have a domain.
There is, in fact, one exception that I want to mention at the very end when I talk about shortcuts.
Okay.
But yes, you're basically making the point that I will make later on, because there's one new feature that is possibly going to reimagine how this entire SiriKit thing works. But I'm saving that as a cliffhanger, if you will, John, for the very end.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Linode. With Linode, you'll have access to a suite of powerful hosting options with prices starting at just $5 per month. And you'll be up and running your own virtual server in the Linode cloud in under a minute. You really can't go wrong with saving time and money. It's a great combination. Linode offers industry-leading performance with native SSD storage, a 40 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They now have 10 data centers spread around the world, meaning you can serve your customers even quicker than before. They have an API that allows you to easily automate tasks or develop custom applications in the cloud, and everything is manageable via the command line. All of Linode's price tiers feature hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services like backups and node balancers. On top of that, Linode guarantees 99.9% uptime for server availability. Once your server is up, they keep it that way. Linode offers additional storage too. Block storage is now out of beta, and it's available in Fremont and Newark. What's more, Linode is expanding their block storage to all data centers. So what can you use Linode for? The answer is a ton of things. Things like hosting large databases, running a mail server, operating a VPN, running Docker containers, hosting a private Git server. The list just goes on and on. Oh, and guess what? Linode is hiring right now. If you're interested, go to linode.com/careers to learn more. Okay, let's talk pricing. Linode has fantastic pricing options available. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for only $5 a month, and they offer high memory plans starting at 16 gigabytes of RAM. As a listener of this show, if you sign up at promo.linode.com/appstories, you'll not only be supporting the show, but you'll also get $20 towards any Linode plan. That's a great deal. On a 1 gigabyte of RAM plan, that's 4 months free. And with a 7-day money-back guarantee, there's nothing to lose. So go to promo.linode.com/appstories right away to learn more, sign up, and take advantage of that $20 credit. Or use the promo code AppStories2018 at checkout. There'll be links and the promo code in the show notes. Thanks so much to Linode for supporting the show.
So let's get into these domains and apps that work with SiriKit. And I saved some examples, and I know you did too. So let's go over some of these implementations. For messaging, which is possibly the most convenient one, I saved WhatsApp. I like the way that you can ask Siri to send a message via WhatsApp, and it will bring up this custom snippet UI that looks like a mini WhatsApp thread with a custom background wallpaper and everything. And you can say, send a message with WhatsApp to, I don't know, John. And then you can say what you want the message to say. And you will send the message using WhatsApp, but from Siri. And that works well enough. One of the main problems for me is that I use WhatsApp primarily because of my Italian friends, but I need to use Siri in English. And Siri, unlike the Google Assistant, doesn't have actually support for multiple languages. So in the Google Assistant, you can interact with the Google Assistant for example, in English, but then dictate something else in Italian. And Google will understand that you're switching languages on the fly. You cannot do the same with Siri.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting that you can't, because I know, the keyboard is bilingual basically, which was something that got added a couple of years ago. That's really nice.
So I'm not using WhatsApp and Siri integration as much as I'd like to, but it works and it's really nice. What else do you have for messaging and SiriKit?
So I will admit that I use Siri primarily with the built-in Messages app more than anything else, but I have tried it on a few other things. Probably the two most common. When I was using Airmail more, I did send a couple of emails using Siri, and there aren't very many email apps that are set up to do this, but email is messaging just like text messaging is. So you're able to send an email to someone. And I remember we tested this out at one point. I sent you an email and you sent one back, and it works just fine, which is kind of nice, but it's not the way I commonly send emails, because I think usually with Siri, you're sending shorter messages more than anything else. So it works a little bit better with more traditional text messaging apps like WhatsApp, and it works with Telegram very much like it does Messages. And another one that I've found that's really an interesting use case too is Twim, which is it's a special Twitter iMessaging type of app that uses Twitter as the backbone for a text messaging service. So you can do DMs to someone using Twim and Siri, which is really cool.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, I like it. An extension, if you will, of the messaging domain, which is actually, I think, a separate domain, but it basically works the same way, is VoIP calling. So if you have apps that allow you to place phone calls over the internet or video calls over the internet, you can also summon those via Siri. Again, WhatsApp is one of them. I know that Skype has the same feature. And you can say, just call, John or Mike using WhatsApp, and it'll just start a voice call through WhatsApp from Siri. It'll bring up the native dialer UI, but it'll say that it's using WhatsApp or Skype or something else. It's interesting because this is the same extensibility framework that allows developers to do this also enables a person's contact card in iOS, in the address book, to feature custom buttons to start calls using third-party apps. So if you have WhatsApp installed or Skype installed, and you go to the contact card in your contacts database for someone who's using those services, you will see buttons to contact them using those two if you will, custom, because they're third-party services, those two applications. It's very nice that Apple is opening up to developers in this way. And I use the call through WhatsApp Siri integration quite a lot.
Do you know if this works with Slack the same way? I don't think it does it?
I don't think it does. I don't think Slack is actually using... I never tried to use SiriKit with Slack. I think it used to be one of the demos that Apple was showing off of Siri integration with Slack, but I never got prompted in Slack to give access to my Siri information. So I don't think they actually have.
Yeah, because Slack has calling now, so it's something that they could add.
I want to talk about lists and notes because I have some thoughts about this domain.
Okay.
So lists and notes is a way for basically note-taking apps, and by list, Apple means task managers, to integrate with Siri. In terms of to-do apps, all the big names are using this. So there's Things, Todoist, OmniFocus. They're all using the list domain for Siri integration. So what you can do is you can create new tasks, you can give them titles, you can give them attributes such as dates or geofence reminders even. You can add them to an existing list or project if the task manager of your choice uses the project terminology. They can OmniFocus. I think John also supports marking things as tasks as complete. Is that correct?
That is right. You can do that, and you can also search for tasks in it as well.
Yeah, and I know the Streaks, the habit tracker, also has support for completing to-dos or habits rather in Siri.
Yeah, which is a really interesting use case, especially since something like Streaks kind of straddles the line between a wellness/health and fitness app and a task manager.
Yeah, and it's one of these examples of the SiriKit domains being used in slightly more creative ways. I mean, even Airmail using the messaging domain for sending emails. That is not necessarily messaging, but it works because the terminology is the same, and because, even if Siri says, okay, I've sent the message, doesn't mean the email message when it's working with Airmail, but the meaning is basically the same, so it kind of works. For to-do apps, for list apps, as Apple calls them, we have task creation, we have metadata creation, we have search and retrieval of tasks. For notes, we have essentially the same feature set, but with a slightly different terminology and some different modes. So you can create new notes, you can give them title, you can give them a body content for the main text of the note. You can also append information to an existing note, and you can search for notes from a compatible app and bring up a list of notes and bring up an individual note with a custom preview inside of Siri. Now, I have yet to find a third-party app that supports append mode for Siri. The last time I talked to some developers about this, everybody said that the append mode was so buggy that they couldn't get it to work. If anyone knows about a note-taking app that supports SiriKit and supports appending information to the bottom of an existing note via voice, please send me an email or reach out on Twitter, because I'm extremely curious to see if that actually works. My second issue is that I've also had trouble finding applications that support search for notes via Siri. So initially I thought Devonthink, which integrates with SiriKit and allows you to create notes via voice, would support search, but I couldn't get it to work. And then I remembered Snip Notes. It's a lightweight note-taking app that I talked about on Club Mac Stories a while back. It's the only app that I remember supports searching for notes via Siri. And it works well enough. You can search for notes by title or by creation date, and it'll bring up this custom snippet that shows you plain text, the actual plain text contents of the note. But I also tried with image notes, which is something that Snip Notes does. It allows you to save a new note from the camera roll, saving a picture that you have in your library. But if you try to bring up that note via Siri, it doesn't work. I suppose because it's trying to load an image in the preview, which in theory, it's supported, but it doesn't work. So half-baked support in the only app that I could find with SiriKit not search integration. Again, if anyone knows of any other apps that support append mode and not search for SiriKit, please let me know, because I really want to play with them.
Any kind of data that has kind of mixed formats like that, where you're mixing plain text and images, I've found is very spotty in how well it works in different parts of the system. Because the same thing holds true with extensions. Extensions are a pretty blunt instrument, because you'll see all sorts of things suggested in your share sheet that don't really work with what you're trying to share. But it's because on some level, whatever it is that you're looking at has one of the components that extension works with. And it's very hard to create an extension that really only works specifically with the data that app is expecting. It's been kind of a problem ever since they were introduced in iOS 8.
Yeah. Moving on, we have payments. This domain allows you to send money to other people without having to open the actual app. I've only used PayPal before, and it worked really well. I was able to send money to a friend in like 15-20 seconds without having to actually open PayPal. So that was really nice. I know that Venmo and you mentioned Square Cash, John, they support SiriKit, but those are US-only services. So I never used them myself.
Right, and I have to say I have not used Square Cash with Siri, just because Square Cash is so fast to use anyway. It's really, for the most part, just one view. You type in an amount, pick a person, and the money's gone. It's really couldn't be easier. So it's nice that this domain exists, but I'm not so sure that there's a ton of demand for this. Although I think, as you noted in our show notes here, that PayPal is not the world's best app, so maybe it is a little easier if you're using Siri, if you're using that particular service.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that I remember that in the payments domain, you can also transfer money between accounts if you have an app that supports multiple accounts, and you can also check how much money is in your digital wallet for that service. So there's both sending payments, moving payments between personal accounts, and checking how many the funds that are available in your account.
Yeah, good luck ever getting a bank app to support Siri. They can barely support 3 OSs ago.
Never gonna happen. One of the new domains in iOS 12 for SiriKit, which we don't have many details about, so the information that we have right now is kind of spotty. It's media. Now, Apple showed this new domain as being ideal for episodic content. They showed off podcasts being able being supported in the shortcut environment. So the ability for third-party media apps to surface podcast episodes to be played without having to open the app. And reading through the docs, which have no explanation, no documentation actually from Apple, just the names of the APIs and the references to the APIs, it appears that third-party media apps will have a way to mark content as being available to Siri. And there will also be an ability for developers to say this episode comes after this one. So to have sort of an up next functionality in the integration with Siri, but it's not clear if this will work for music or just spoken content, if Apple will approve. I don't know, Spotify trying to use the media domain for Siri. It's not clear if this requires the user to manually set up a shortcut first, or if you can just talk to Siri and say, in Overcast, play this. My understanding is that the user will have to manually set up a shortcut first. So this is kind of a half domain in that you will not be able to talk to Siri and say, in my Spotify, play my Discover Weekly. I don't think it'll work like that. My understanding so far, and I hope I'm wrong, is that you have to set up a shortcut manually first. So behind the scenes, it'll use the media domain, but actually you have to set it up as a shortcut.
So that would be the kind of thing where you could set it up for a specific playlist that you've created yourself, or maybe a playlist in a podcast app too, right? As opposed to saying, I don't know, play a certain album, and then the API knowing all the songs in that album, or play X episode of App Stories. You couldn't do either of those things, I don't think, at least as we understand it now, right?
Yeah, that's what I was able to put together so far. Again, I hope that is actually different in the end, because I want to be able to talk to Siri and use the actual names of the apps that I like, Overcast, Spotify, Castro, I don't know, all of these third-party media players, I don't want to have a half-baked integration. But also there's a discussion about the competitive advantage that Apple has with Apple Music and podcasts and their native integration with Siri, which I don't want to get into today, but so we'll have to see how it actually works eventually.
Right.
Last domains that I want to talk about, let's see, we can go through this quickly. Visual codes is a way to bring up a QR code if you have a profile on a social network or a QR code that opens your website. You can bring up these codes via Siri. And I think the best app to try this stuff is the Visual Codes app by Benjamin Mayo. Benjamin works at 9to5Mac and he's also an indie developer, and he made this app that I was able to test last year when Apple added the integration. And it works really nice because you can ask Siri to bring up your QR code and it'll bring up the actual image of the code so you can show it off to people if you want to share quickly a QR code for your website or like your email address or something. So that's really nice. Photos, another domain. I never actually tested. I just know that you can search for images within Siri and that Pinterest supports a SiriKit image search. Ride booking, as the name implies, this is used by Uber and Lyft and other ride booking services. You can call a ride from Siri, or you can check in on the status of an existing ride. So you can ask Siri to see if your Lyft is actually arriving or not. And you'll see this map updating in real time, which is really nice. Also, Lyft shows you a richer UI than Uber when you can say stuff like, I need to go to SFO. With Lyft, you need to always include the name of the app. And it'll confirm with you that it'll say, to confirm, there is just one passenger, right? So you can confirm there, you can confirm booking the ride, and then you can check on the status of the ride from Siri. It's a very nice process, actually, and it also works in Apple Maps. So Apple Maps has extensions that allow for ride booking services and restaurant reservations to happen from within the Maps interface. And they're actually based on the same SiriKit technology. What's kind of strange here is that ride booking is supported in both places, but restaurant reservations also use SiriKit, but they're only supported in Maps.
Yeah.
And you need to have a partnership with Apple if you have a restaurant reservation app that wants to integrate with SiriKit and work with Maps. I don't know why. I guess it's the restaurant reservation is a more visual thing, and Apple wants to make sure that it only works within Maps, where you can browse a restaurant's listing page and have contact information and everything. It's really nice. In Italy, we have The Fork, which is our alternative to OpenTable and Yelp, I guess. And it works in Maps. It brings up a custom UI with reserving what time you wanna reserve a table, how many people are how many people you need to reserve for. You can enter special requests in text fields, but it only works in Maps, and I don't know why.
Okay.
Finally, we have workouts. It's another domain that allows you to start and stop workouts, supporting a bunch of apps that you reminded me of, John. Workouts Plus, Slopes, Zones, Nike Plus Run Club. All of these allow you to start and stop a workout using Siri, which is nice.
Yeah, which is, I think, a nice use, because a lot of times, especially when you're finishing a workout, you might be all hot and sweaty, and it's a little hard to, whether you're on your watch or whatever, stop a workout. And just being able to speak it to Siri on your watch or something is a lot easier.
And finally, we have the car domains, which is actually split in two parts. We have a way to interact with the CarPlay system using SiriKit. Again, I don't know what this means because I don't have a CarPlay system. But also, if you have a compatible car, my understanding is that they can make a custom app that works with SiriKit and allows you to directly summon door locks and retrieve other status about the car. You play with this stuff. I think it's about climate control and radio control.
Yeah, those are a couple of examples that I've seen. I have CarPlay, but unfortunately, the app that Honda makes doesn't support these things, so I haven't ever been able to try that sort of thing.
All right. So this is a brief overview of the domains that are supported in SiriKit and some examples of third-party apps that you can try. There will be links to the apps in the show notes. My final, the cliffhanger part. Now, shortcuts in iOS 12 will work with SiriKit. in a way that third-party apps will be able to offer individual Siri shortcuts. So little actions that can perform tasks in the background within the environment where you're using shortcuts. So it could be the spotlight screen, it could be Siri, it could be the Shortcuts app. And you will find these SiriKit powered actions that use the same APIs we discussed, the same SiriKit framework we talked about today, but you will have them as individual shortcuts, individual actions. Now, as part of the Shortcuts initiative, Apple is also launching a custom SiriKit domain that allows developers of all kinds of apps that don't necessarily fall into one of these domains to integrate with SiriKit. And the way that you make a custom domain is you open Xcode and you actually choose from a list of verbs and a list of nouns that you want to use, such as do or play or order. You have this generic template for generic English sentences and categories of actions that basically tell Siri how to talk about your app, how to talk about the app integration. So for example, if you're buying something, if you make an app to buy clothes online, you don't want Siri to say, okay, I've done the clothes. You want Siri to say, okay, I've bought the clothes. So it's a way for Siri to understand what kind of language to use. And it seems, I'm not a developer, but just looking at the screenshots of putting together a custom domain, it looks simple enough. It's got a bunch of drop-down menus where you need to choose the kind of verb and the kind of action that you want Siri to perform. And I think this is interesting because it's sort of Apple trying to win back the developer support that we've seen with Amazon and Alexa skill, with Amazon and Echo skills. Just how developers are able to fully configure their app integrations, and with these skills that allow them to put together all these possible ramifications for their apps. I think this is an interesting approach that will probably evolve over time as Apple makes the custom domain more flexible for developers, so that instead of having to add more domains and instead of developers having to wait for Apple to bring in new domains and new intents, developers can just make their own and they can just write their own custom Siri integration. It's a custom domain, it's a custom intent, and that, if it works, in theory, should open up SiriKit to a much, much broader category of apps because there are no preset domain types, there are no templates, there are no restrictions, but it's up to developers to make their own custom Siri integration.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great gap filler because, with iOS 11, we only saw the addition of a couple of intents or a couple of domains. And it's one of those things that if you had to wait around for Apple to get around to your particular category, first of all, it might take a long time. And second of all, the way it's defined may or may not work well with your app. And this way, I think there's a little bit more control on the part of the developer to hopefully be able to make a little bit more out of shortcuts than they could have, and a lot more soon than they could have if they had to wait around for Apple to create a domain. All right, well, that's it for this week, folks. Thanks again to Linode for making this episode possible. And as always, you can find both of us writing at macstories.net. And Federico is on Twitter. He's at Viticci, that's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.